out there in LinkedIn land. I already see the comments coming in. Hi, Gianluca. Hi, Kirsten. Hi, everyone. Happy, what is this today? Sunday? Bienvenue de les Jeux Olympiques du Monde. What day is it? Jour 9, 10, 10, 9, 10. The Olympics are going on in the background. I let my doors open to everyone who wants to hear some of the outside noise. There's a lot going on outside right now. A couple different people that are celebrating, I think, early parties for the Olympics. It's already starting to ramp up here. So I see Justin in here. Hi, Justin. Hi, Gianluca. Hi, Noel. So welcome to the Sales Olympics. I'm wearing my feisty Taylor Swift shirt here today. I don't know if you can see her, but Taylor's with me. I found out some news. So I've had some controversial opinions over the years. Maybe, of course. I had a specifically controversial opinion about something like 2 years ago that everyone was batting me down on. And now it's kind of changing in the market. I've been seeing a couple posts that are kind of coming to the other side of the house. And I went back to one of my posts and someone had deleted their comments. They were on the other side and they deleted their comments. Y'all, that's not fair. I think that we should have an evergreen, like permanent record of what was said, just so everyone's on the same side. Hi, Ian. How are you doing? You're coming in from Scotland again. I've never actually been to Scotland. I've been to Ireland. I know that's not Scotland. And I've also been to the UK, but I've never been to Scotland. Okay, so welcome everyone. Sorry about yesterday. I know that we had kind of a couple different changes on the time schedule. So today we're going to be going into a very meaty topic, even though it's the weekend. So it's the weekend, so I tried to dress a little bit more casually, but still in my red, white, and blue. The topic today is why you shouldn't want to get multiple buyers to agree on the problem that they want to solve. So this is specifically in terms of, I hear this a lot in terms of multi-threading of, when you have upwards of 15 to 20 people that are within a buying committee, that I should get everyone in the same room and I should get them to agree on the problem that they want to solve together, all 15 or 20 of them. So why that's not a good idea and what you should do instead is basically the topic today. But there are more multi-threading, more buyers than ever before within a deal. So that is the topic for today. We're going to go ahead and shove off. Look at that fencing, by the way. French are big on fencing, on guard, right? En garde. Okay, let's go into tour numéro 1. So what is a problem? So it's a good place to start here, even though it's somewhat of a review. So a problem is just going to be anything that someone essentially is going to solve for, that they see worth solving for in relationship to their metric. So if I am in HR, for instance, I'm going to consider all things that are in relationship to employee retention as problems that I need to solve. Or if I'm in, customer success, then I'm going to view anything that is in relationship to customer retention or my lagging indicator, what I need to solve. So this is how anyone is going to be anchoring something that they're going to change. So you have to keep in mind that there's a number of different things that people have to essentially go through to change. They have to have a gap of a delta, a massive delta that they need to change in terms of the root cause. So let's say that, I'm an SDR, for instance, and the root cause that I believe my quota attainment problem is I need to change the quality of my email. So there's a number of things that they're going to have to do that. They're going to have to find out what is quality. They're going to have to find out what's not working in the email. They're going to have to make sure that they change. They're going to have to make sure that they change consistently. They're going to have to make sure that all the reps are on the exact same page, or get the reps to use templates that they've preordained, which won't include personalization. And then you get a lot of feedback of like, oh, well, I want my own voice included, et cetera, et cetera. Once, let's say that they got a whole bunch of templates and then they load them into sales engagement, Then you've got to train the team on how to use them. What are the pieces of personalization you have to include? Were there any hiccups? Are these actually working? So there's a certain amount of pain of changing the root cause. Then there's a certain amount of pain of seeing that it has solved the tactical problem. So the tactical problem, as a reminder, is anything in relationship to the leading indicator. So non-performance or non-final performance-based metrics to help them understand that they're on the right path. So they have to see, did this increase my open rate? Did this increase my reply rate? Did it increase my open rate, but it decreased my reply rate? Did it increase it enough to where it's going to solve for my business problem? So they have to monitor a number of different things and say, like, did this actually, solve my tactical problem? Usually it's not just a set it and forget it, meaning you change something and then you change it again, and then you change it again, and you have to change a couple other things. There's a certain amount of change to pain to seeing if it solved the tactical problem. And then the last one is going to be the business problem. Did that increased open rate and did that reply rate actually get me to my business problem goal? So the business problem, is just in accordance with the lagging indicator. So the lagging indicator would be the gap of they're only booking, let's say, 3 meetings per month. They need to book 10 meetings per month. Or for a customer success person, let's say that they're only retaining 80% of their customers and their internal goal is 95%. So the problem that they're going to solve is going to be that what they want to change, essentially, is the business problem and the driving impact of why they're changing it. But how they change that is by changing the tactical problem. And how they change that is by changing the root cause. So people are going to have to go through the process of changing a root cause, to change a tactical problem, to change a business problem, to change the reality that a driving impact is going to become true. I have to make up this delta in terms of quota attainment. Otherwise, I fear that I'm going to get let go. And the market's not really good, so I fear I might not be able to get a job in the future. So those metrics, the reason I go in so heavily there is because that is the only thing that's going to be on this person's mind, this buyer persona's mind, is their metric. So you have indicators, which just signify something, a performance indicator, which is a performance-related metric that signifies something. It comes as a result of something. And then you have a key performance indicator, meaning out of all the performance indicators that are involved here or could be on deck, which ones do I affect as a buyer persona? And a problem is going to be in relationship to that always, right? And it's got to be aggressive enough to where it is worth solving. So everything hypothetically and nothing at all hypothetically, the exact same time are worth solving. It depends on a matter of priority, right? So I'm going to prioritize something based on the level of pain or the level of impact it becomes true. But per persona, that is where that problem is going to be anchored. It's going to be anchored to my metrics. So when we're talking about getting everyone in a room to agree on a problem that they want to solve, you have to keep in mind they're on different metrics. So it's like saying we have a fencing sport, and we have a basketball player, and we have a soccer player, and we have a gymnast, and we have a swimmer, and we need to get all of those people in the same room to agree on the problem that they need to solve. And it's like, well, they're completely different sports. So the solution hypothetically might be the same, but how they're going to use it is going to be entirely different. So it might be the same pair of shoes that they land on, but what I'm looking for it to yield in fencing is traction. Can it help me turn really quickly? What I'm looking for in soccer, let's say it's indoor soccer, we want something to glide really smoothly so I can run faster. So in no case scenario, when you change persona to persona to persona, are you going to keep the problems the same that they are trying to solve? The solution might be the same, but the problem is not. So kind of in summary here, the problem is that the circumstance that they want to change and the impact that's attached to it of why they want to change it per persona is a thing that they're trying to change whenever they're going through any kind of purchasing decision at all. How's everyone doing out there? Jay Frank, Gianluca, Justin. We got a lot of J's and G's up in here. It's the J Club, Kirsten. You're not a J or a G. J or a G. So I want to see that y'all are still live. It's a Sunday episode, so it should be much more of a fun episode. So why don't we do this? Because we're going to have an extra lap near the end. There's been a lot of people that have come into the chat with some questions. So if you're out there, Ian, Kirsten, anyone who's out there, if you have a question in accordance with anything that we've talked about over the last sessions, whether that be business problem, tactical problem, finding unknowns, anything, if you have a question, if you can put it in the chat, and we can do that during the last section today. See, I let my hair down on Sunday. Physically and metaphorically. So if you have a question, thank you, Jay Frank. So if you have a question, anyone who's in the chat of anything that we've covered or that's popped up over the last 10 days, you're like, that's something I need more clarity on, or that's something that I want to hear more about. If you would pop it into the chat, and I'll be sure to cover it in the last section. Okay, so without further ado, let's go into lap number 2, which is what metrics are the problem anchored to? Another thing you could do, if you want to go into the chat and you want to give me your buyer personas, who are the buyer personas that you sell into? Here in Italy, often happens that they have no idea of their metrics and KPI or objectives. Yeah, that's also it's across the board. Gianluca, if you don't mind, if you would put in, or I don't know if that was the question, but if you have a question in accordance with that, or if you want to, or if you want to put in your buyer persona, and we can kind of look them up together. But basically the 3 metrics, and we're going to give a brief overview, and then we can just start Googling some for anyone who wants to throw their buyers into the chat. I'm feeling rogue today. Commercial directors. Commercial of what? Sales directors, plant directors. But the 3 types of metrics, there's only 3. There's a lagging indicator, which is the final thing that they're hired and fired to drive. And there's only 1 to 3 of them. Usually there's 1 primary and there's 2 like auxiliary, meaning they're not that important, but they're sometimes included as a piece of this. So sales directors. Oh, okay. Okay, so we'll do that one in just a minute, Gianluca. So, but if anyone else has questions too, or buyer personas they want to cover, you put them in the chat. But we'll do sales directors, SaaS founders. Okay, these are some good ones. So lagging indicators are going to be the final ones. Basically, they're hired and fired to drive. Leaning indicators are going to be the performance-related indicators that help them predict whether they're going to hit their lagging indicators. And if not, to diagnose which leading indicator they want to change. They think that they should change. And once they've changed it, to reevaluate to see if they've changed it enough in the right direction. There's going to be about 5 to 10 of these, hovering around that number. And then the last thing is leading indicators. These are the variables that you can actually change. So anytime that you pivot, usually up a ladder, you're going to go up a tier in terms of what are their lagging indicators, leaning and leading. So looks like we've got, okay, accounting firms, owners of accounting firms. Okay, and SaaS founders, and we've got sales directors. Okay, so sales directors, why don't we start there? So sales directors, their lagging indicator is going to be closed won quota attainment. So their gap, their business problem is going to be in relationship to that. So I haven't covered this too in depth. I actually haven't covered it at all. But there are actually 12 different types of problems. Just when you thought there weren't more, there are more. The one that we've discussed really is a negative symptom-based problem, meaning there's enough pain in relationship to their goal and where they currently are in terms of their lagging indicator. So the sales directors, what they're going to be after is going to be closed won quota attainment. Some leading indicators, or sorry, leaning indicators for sales directors are going to be conversion ratio into closed won, or sales cycle. You know, how long is that? Or the amount that they have to discount, or average sales price is going to be another one, or stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, et cetera, conversion. So a couple of unknowns for sales directors, and I'm going to go on to some of the other ones here, or I'll do leading indicators, go on to some of the other ones here. Some of the unknowns for sales directors. One of the unknowns for sales directors that they don't know, they always want more pipeline, right? But one of the unknowns is usually the demo request line is set up in such a way that only about 9% of the people who request to talk to them are actually going to get a first meeting with AEs. The reason that it goes unknown is because technically marketing is metriced on just it becoming an MQL, which happens when they request a demo, and they aren't measured necessarily on the conversion into did they actually have a meeting. So there's one unknown for a sales director. A second unknown for a sales director is they are basing, when an AE accepts an opportunity into their pipeline, basically it becomes an opportunity. They're measured on conversion, right? So they're smart. So they basically don't want to say that anything counts. They're never going to admit like, oh, I lost this because I didn't sell well, right? You go into the channel and they'll say like, oh, it went dark, for instance. And it's like, no, you caused it to go dark, right? So one of the unknowns is if there are no static criteria of what is an opportunity. So it should be things like level of role or amount of employees within the company that disqualifies them from being able to sell into them. So if they hit those criteria, it should be counted as an opportunity. And you should use that as your starting point of metric into closed won. So closed won, you know, typical, like as it stands, there is no data point. It actually shows the AE's forecasting ability more than it does their actual sales ability, because that conversion rate is going to be metriced on the first data point into, you know, how many of those close. So something you might have them look at is how many days on average did it take when they put in before they put an opportunity into the CRM, like they count it as an opportunity, to it actually closed. Usually you're going to see a really short cycle there because they don't want to count it until right before the end when they know it's going to close. So leaning conversion is ASP, discount rate, sales cycle, and then conversion rate into closed won or stage conversion. And then leading indicators are how quickly they're following up, what they're following up with, what questions are they asking in discovery, and are they finding any unknowns? So we're going to really shake off the I feel like the LAP model in this piece because we have a lot of good questions coming in. Okay, let's pivot to SaaS founders and owners of accounting firms, and we'll do that one within Lab 3. And then we've got CTO, CIO, CMO. There's a lot of personas. Okay, so let's do founders, and then we'll do CTO, CIO. Marketers is relatively easy. That's MQL. But we'll do CTO, CIO, but first we'll do founders, and then I'm going to answer these questions. So why don't we just go into Lab 3? Lab 3 we'll call the Persona Lab. So here's a great example to stay on topic. When the metrics are different, the problems are different. So I'm about to shout out a whole bunch of metrics, and trying to get them to agree on the same problem is crazy because all of their metrics are completely different. They're only going to solve in relationship to these metrics. So SaaS founders and accounting firms and owners of accounting firms, their founders and owners are going to be similar, and that their North Star is basically that they don't go bankrupt, right? It's profitability. So yes, part of that is revenue, but the other part is what are their expenses. So specific to SaaS founders, what they're going to care about is how many rounds can they raise. So what stage are they at? So the thing that I would be after the business problem for a founder, if it's truly a founder, Justin, how many employees are you going after for SaaS founders? If you don't mind me asking. The business problem is going to be anchored to basically their profitability. So how much revenue are they making? How much expenses are they incurring? Now, the impact to a SaaS founder of not solving the business problem is going to be they can't raise another round, or they look bad in front of their board, so they get churned as a CEO. So the joke is you need one CEO for 0 to 1 million. You need a second CEO for 1 million to 10, from 10 to 20, from 20 to 50, and then another one from 50 to 250 and once you go public. So I'd say a huge thing about SaaS founders that they're worried about is do I get this thing off the ground? And even if I get it off the ground, is my board going to replace me because they believe that, yes, I was one to come up with the idea, but I wasn't the one to basically execute in the end. So usually their impacts are going to be relying around that. Can they raise another round? Can they raise another round? How much growth and run rate do they have? Growth rate is going to be where the business problem also is going to lie for that. And then what they're scared of is that they can't raise another round, that they're going to go bankrupt, or they have to do a garbage acquisition, basically, or they're going to be replaced as a founder. Owners of accounting firms, Bob, if you could tell me how many people, 50 to 400, Justin, that's exactly where they're at then. If it's 50 to 400, then they're in growth mode. That's what their business problem is going to be, is do we hit these revenue growth targets? So that's usually going to be when people are in hyper growth. They've been given, they're either an A or a B round at this point. So their business problem is going to be around hitting the growth goal that the board gave them. So for the accounting firms, for owners of an accounting firm, it's going to be less board related. Right? Because when I think of owners of accounting firms, I'm thinking it's 5 to 25 employees, exactly. So they're thinking about just profitability. Do they stay profitable? And I would shake off basically the instance that they're answering into a board. Not a lot of personally owned accounting firms are worried about that. So their lagging indicator is going to be profitability, not a growth goal, like in Justin's case. So the things that I would be after, from a business perspective, is basically how profitable are they? What is the target for the firm overall? What are some of the leading indicators are going to be? How many clients do they have? How many renew clients do they have? Not just for one piece of tax season. I would say how many clients do they have that are brought on as full-time clients, not just a once a year for a tax season. I'm thinking of the accounting firm that I went with. I originally went month to month, and then I wasn't seeing the value. So I trimmed the whole thing out. I'm like, just do my taxes. So, I mean, that's an example of it. During a down economy, an expense that people are going to trim. So their entire business problem, if they're truly the owner, is going to be anchored around how much money are they bringing in versus how much expenses they have internally. CTO and CIO, I'm going to bring up basically a list, but I went into these for actually a client, oddly enough. I sell into a lot of technical buyer personas. So CIO basically is going to have, anytime you get a C level, you're going to have multiple lagging indicators or multiple things that they're over. Risk management, customer satisfaction, CSAT, employee engagement, cross-functional relationships, and managing budget. That's for CIO. For IT manager, you've got RPO, recovery time objective, server downtime, server uptime, ticket close rate, total support tickets versus open tickets, phishing test success rate, unsolved tickets per employee. Network manager, you've got network availability, throughput, network speed, latency, jitter, packet loss, bandwidth, packet duplication, etc. I want to get into a CTO so that you have that one. Or maybe I put the CTO over here. So, any rate, so CIO, a couple of metrics that they're going to be looking at. I'm going to get the dinger. I'm not even going to be looking at this topic, but a couple of things they're going to be thinking is percentage of IT risks integrated into organization's risk management approach, number of risk management issues, number of IT initiatives that impact the organizational KPI, amount the customer retention rate, customer attraction rate, costs are required for digital transformation. Here, percentage of projects on time, average issue handling time, new developed feature, number of critical bugs, mean time between failure, mean time to repair, mean time to detect, number of tasks automated, defects per product, compliance resolution, compliance cycle time, intrusion attempts, cybersecurity rating, accuracy, IT ROI versus IT ROI spend, reopen tickets, IT support employees, endpoints per technician, antivirus, anti-malware deployment, patch success rate, days since last incident, backup success rate, backup frequency, internal products testing, team attrition rate. So those are what they're going to be metriced on or looking at. Now, full disclosure, most of those are going to be leading indicators. So if I were to be after a CMO, for instance, we can do this. We'll do one last one really quickly in the handing off the baton, and then I'm going to get to questions on the back end. But basically, let's say that I was going after CMO. That was one that was listed. So CMO KPIs. That's all I'm going to type in the browser. So this is what I do for most of my buyers, CMO KPIs. So here's 20 that they should be looking after. So I'm just going to sessions by channel, session duration. So that's leaning, page views by page, total number of users, engagement rate, click-through rate, session conversion rate, churn, customer acquisition cost, influence revenue, sales qualified leads, number of qualified leads, organic reach rate, pipeline velocity, return visitors. That should give you a good starting point. But I'd say a marketer, to answer the question of Chaz, it is going to be much after MQL. Usually, MQL demo request rate is going to be their primary, and then the one that's for basically brand awareness is going to be number of people typically that come to an event, or number of people that typically that are coming to that like register for something is going to be where their KPIs are at. So the quick way to do it, I would just go to Google and say, what are the KPIs of my buyer persona? And then you'll get in the right ballpark. So when I'm reading through all of these, so for instance, and then we're going to go into questions and then we can close out. But basically when I'm reading through all of these, I'm like, okay, percentage of projects on time, average handle issue, new developed features, number of critical bugs, mean time between failures, mean time to detect, mean time to repair. When I hear all of those, all I'm asking myself is a question to define leaning and lagging. So which one of these do I believe that they'll get fired for? So out of that list I just gave you, I would think they'd get fired for number of critical bugs, especially if a bug has an impact on the market, and newly developed features. Mean time to repair, mean time to detect, and mean time between failures, those are all going to be leading indicators. But those, I would guess, would be where the lagging indicators are. Okay, let's go into lap. Is it 4? Okay, I'm going to cover for the first part, what the agenda was supposed to be about, and then we're going to finish with questions. The punchline is, if I get a CMO and CTO and CIO and SaaS founder and owner of an accounting firm and a sales director in the same room, I want y'all to, if Justin, Ian, Bob Harper, Chaz, I want y'all to jump into the chat. When I was listing off the KPIs for the other people who are on this line, so Bob, when I was listing off the KPIs for CTO and CIO, were you bored? And Justin, when I was listing off Chaz's for a CTO and CIO, were you kind of bored and you were like, oh, this isn't relevant to me? Or were you still really engaged in the section? I want y'all to jump into the chat and answer that. So when I wasn't covering your metrics, I was covering someone else's metrics. Were you very engaged in watching this video? Yes or no? See, here's the point. Ian just said no. And why not, Ian? Why weren't you super engaged whenever I was talking about everyone else's KPIs? Why wasn't the video really valuable to you then? Yes and no, because I'm a SaaS founder, but I know what you mean. Right? I think y'all are just being nice. The point is, Ian, CTO, CIO are bored first. The point is, just like you were bored because it had nothing to do with your buyers, Justin said for CTO, he was bored. And then Ian said, this is brilliant, Ian. It's not a problem I solve for. So the point of this whole episode is this. Ian was bored during the pieces that weren't relevant to him because they weren't about his buyers. The same way that you're multiple buyers in a room, when you're not asking about their KPIs and their problems, they're the same amount of bored that you are. Because they're like, that's great for the sales team, but I'm a marketer, so I don't really care. That's great for the sales enablement team, but I'm a seller, so I don't really care about if they take those tests or not, or if they know how to represent our new product. So when I get them in a room, and then we're going to go finish out with these questions, you go through discovery with a first buyer. Your job, in my opinion, is to find their business problem, their impacts, their tactical problem, their root cause, and a few unknowns. Every single session, you have to find a few unknowns. Every additional meeting that you have, when they add different buyers, if I get a sales enablement person on the line next, now I got to find some unknowns for them. And I got to find their problem, what they're trying to solve in this. And they're completely different. Then when they add in the VP of sales, I cannot tell you the amount of times that someone has told me at the beginning of this is what the VP of sales is trying to solve for. The VP of sales gets on the line, it's completely different than what they said because they don't know, because they're not the VP of sales. So once I get them on the line, I have to find 3 unknowns for them, and I have to find out what their business problem is. What is their delta between where they're at in quota? So every single meeting that you have someone fresh, you need to diagnose where they're at, what do they hypothetically want to solve, and 2 to 3 unknowns. And that might sound exhausting, but you either do or you don't. And if you don't, then that person is not going to be on your side, right? They don't see you as an expert. So it's exhausting, but it's more exhausting to lose the deal entirely and not know why. So I have a number of deals that have closed over the last couple months that this was the case. By the end of the ring, I had like 10 buyers, and I had found 3 to 4 unknowns for each one of those 10 buyers. But it's like butter melting. They just melt into clothes. Why? Because every single time someone new comes on that line, my goal is not to get a sales enablement professional to agree on solving an MQL problem with a marketer. That's crazy. Even if you could force them to say that, it's a signal. Let's call it a virtue signal. They're like, yeah, that's totally important, but they don't care. They care about ramp time. So I had a meeting last week, and I had 5 buyers on the line, and each one of them wanted to take 10 minutes of it. They're like, how is this going to solve my problem and my problem and my problem? And after we get done with the ring, it's such a sweet air of like, this is how that's going to solve this quota attainment problem. This is how that's going to solve, like, sales enablement speaks up. And they're like, what about ramp time? Ramp time's my KPI. So I'm like, this is how we could hypothetically attack that with a library and onboarding and materials and blah, blah, blah. For the SDRs, this is hypothetical. Like, I mean, there was KPIs after KPIs after KPIs of projections of like, okay, this is how it could influence marketers, influence close one, basically, because the meetings, they had a whole bunch of people who were downloading content that the SDRs weren't booking meetings because it was too long to list clean. SDR is a gap of around 6 meetings to 12 meetings that they need to get per month. Sales, they're at a 5% conversion. Need to get them 12% conversion because they're 40% behind quota as a team. Sales enablement, it's ramp time. It's at 18 months and they need to get it to 6. So each one of those problems is completely different. I can try to get them to say that they all care about ramp time, but they don't. The only thing it broadcasts to me, like as the buyer, is that you either don't recognize my goals or you don't give a crap about them. But every single time you have a buyer, the punchline is you have to find something, 3 brand new unknowns for them. And you have to at minimum diagnose a business problem, tactical problem, or root cause, or they don't think you can help them solve anything at all as a buyer. Question. We're going to do an extra 7 minutes. This has been the most rogue session. It's Sunday, y'all. Taylor's doing it to me. It's a Taylor Swift session. Okay, we're going to go into a couple of these questions, but if you have to jump off, thank you for staying on. So we've got a question from Ian. We've got a question from Justin, and we've got a question from Bob, and we've got, okay. Yes, Justin, all buyers are asking what's in it for me. So Ian wasn't, worried about what's in it for a CTO buyer. That's not his buyer. We're going to that online. So those are the 3 questions we're going to answer. So if you have other questions, please stack them up in the chat. Ian, sorry for war and peace here. I work in a multi-million-dollar industry where it's typical for a multidisciplinary team at varying levels to closely analyze at large purchasing decisions. Of course, amen. At what point it ultimately becomes shifted to a financial decision, amen, where somebody very high up has to sign a check. And to do this, they often want to know their ROI and CIO. I'm presuming that we're okay to broach the subject and assist them to understand at this stage, because to typically actually appraise how big a problem associated impact is, you need to leverage against the current state in some way. Yeah, so 2 things. Financial buyers have become more important than ever, especially the last couple of years. People aren't just throwing around cash anymore. So gross profit margin is a CFO's biggest metric. So I actually did this with a buyer the other day. So I'm going to list off some KPIs for a CFO, and then you can do the mental math of which ones can you help a CFO affect. So if the CFO is your buyer, meaning the end buyer, it doesn't matter if they're the middle level buyer, someone you need buying, you got to keep in mind, omission bias is ever present, meaning people do not want to be held accountable for making a mistake, especially in this market. So that's why they're including so many heads, because they're like, if this doesn't go well, you hear all those birds on the balcony. I've got a pigeon that comes up. I call him Buttface because he only shows up for bread every day. But point being, these decisions, they're including as many people as they can because they don't want to be held accountable in this market for making a mistake, right? Because that can mean the end of their job. So CFO is a lot of times a financial buyer. So the best 2 things that you can do, number 1, is to get all of the precursor buyers. Let's start in the situation that you don't have access to the CFO, right? I would want to prepare basically my other buyers with the CFO case, number 1. And number 2, you want to get these other buyers so riled up about solving it and purchasing it because of how many unknowns you diagnose. So this deal that I'm talking about last week, sales enablement, VP of sales, marketer, everyone's in the room. We are building a business case for the CFO, right? And so all of their metrics are included in this CFO doc. And I'm like, but wait, CFO's on gross profit margin. So we have to justify, like, you want to get, quote unquote, in this case scenario, all the kids riled up. They really, really want this, because the parent just comes down the stairs and they're like, where do y'all want to go? What movie do y'all want to see? And all of a sudden, if 4 kids all say the same movie, they're going to like kiss their lucky stars. They're like, awesome, I'll take you to see that movie. So the decision maker is the kids. So they need to all be bought in as a group, not on what problem they're going to solve, but that you're ultimately the solution to solve each one of their respective problems. But the second thing that you can do is you can couch the business case to what the CFO actually cares about. So when they read the business case, you got to keep in mind they're measured on gross profit margin. So number one thing they want to do is divide whatever you send over to them in a quarter. Doesn't matter what it is. They're like, show me the ROI and see blah, blah, blah. Show me the ROI of this, because their default is, I don't want to buy this, because that's how they hit their metric. So, but there is a chance that you help with some of them. So gross profit margin is the most important to them, and that's total revenue minus cost of goods sold. Revenue growth rate is something they care about. That's a leading indicator. So sales in the current period minus sales in the previous period. And by the way, this is for everyone who's on the line. If you're on this line, you do have a CFO buyer, unless you're selling only to owners. So in Chaz's case of only to owners of 5 or 10 person firms, then like that's the only case. So you don't have a CFO buyer. But a lot of these other cases, that's going to be true. EBITDA margin. So EBITDA, net income plus interest plus tax plus D&A expense divided by total sales. Or you could do total sales minus COGS minus operating expenses plus DA expense divided by total sales. They're measured on revenue variance analysis. So actual units sold minus budgeted units sold times price per unit. And another one they're metric on is is return on assets. So net income divided by average total assets. So for example, I know that the CFO is going to be the buyer. So net income divided by the return on assets is net income divided by average total assets. So let's imagine I'm selling sales training. How I could couch it to a CFO is that they don't discount anymore. Right? So I'm selling sales training. What I'm saying is the ASP is going to raise. So when the ASP raises, that's important for the sales leader because they need to hit their quota. But how it couches to the CFO is they're measured on return on assets. So if the net income is higher, let's say I'm selling each apple for $10 and there's $10 a piece and there's 10 apples. So the return on assets is basically I have $10 return, for every single asset minus the cost of goods sold, obviously. So the angle that I would go is, but they're discounting. They're discounting the apples from 15 to 10 typically. So if we get them to stop discounting, which would be through changing the way that they sell, then it would be $15 for 10 apples. So all of a sudden, their return on their assets raises because the income that raises because they're not discounting anymore. So I'm looking at these financial metrics and I'm like, which one of these would buying me hypothetically solve? So anytime that you change countries, I need to figure out how to say either way or, anyways in French. And then I have to learn how to say that in Spanish. And then I have to learn how to say that in Italian. What does it mean to them? So the language change that you're going through is to a CFO. How does the things that you change going to affect these metrics for them? So operating cash flow is another big one for them. So that's operating income plus depreciation minus taxes plus change in working capital. Cash conversion cycle, that's days inventory outstanding plus days sales outstanding minus days payable outstanding. Working capital, current assets minus current liabilities. Accounts payable turnover, total cost of sales divided by average accounts payable. Accounts receivable turnover, which is net credit sales divided by average accounts receivable. Days sales outstanding, days payable outstanding, return on equity, cash runway, quick ratio, debt to equity ratio. So I'm not going to keep going on these, but you get the point. If I were looking at these, I'm like, okay, I'm couching for my buyer. So in that sheet with that new buyer, I'm like, okay, so how this is going to hit them is basically gross profit margin, because the total revenue will rise because their ASP is going to rise hypothetically, right? If we do discovery training together, and the return on assets is going to rise, and then also their cash runway is going to rise because they're going to have more cash on hand because the deal's closed. So I would look at those metrics and say, what is buying me? If I were a CFO that had to buy my product, will it affect any of my metrics that are in here, and how so, and what's that going to look like? Okay, second question. How can we detect better if the deal is not closing due to status quo or indecision? Oh, great question. Okay, here's the thing. Great question. I'm also going to slap you on the hand, Justin. At the same time, he's like, I'm already gone, Becc. Joke's on you. Okay. Status quo and indecision. For everyone, as a review on the line, status quo is they don't think the problem's big enough. Indecision is they do believe the problem's big enough, but they don't close anyway. So how to tell the difference between the two is I'm going to define the point as when they mobilize to actually do something about it, meaning they took a meeting with you, especially if inbound, you're going to lose to indecision. You're past status quo. If they come inbound, you are past status quo. If you booked a meeting with them off of a webinar, let's say, they might not be past status quo yet. Meaning if I read, something on how to sell better or whatever it is, on how to be a better CFO or how to get my return on assets higher, then I might not be at the level that it's so bad that I have to do something about it. However, it gives you a breeding ground of people that are not quite there yet. So I'd say anytime, if they come inbound, they are already past status quo, it's indecision that you're going to lose to. And I'm going to tell you why I'm going to slap your hand in just a second. If it's postbound, if you booked the lead from postbound, meaning non-hand raising marketing stuff, an event, a webinar, piece of content, whatever, it would depend on the piece of content, but I'd say they're likely in indecision. Meaning if it was bad enough, they would have raised their hand. And outbound, you're almost entirely going to into indecision. So once they take that first meeting, if it's inbound, you're for sure past status quo and you're in indecision. But if you're in postbound, if you book the meeting through a content webinar or a blog subscriber, newsletter, or outbound, you're in status quo very likely, right? So let's start with the former. Yeah. So if they're inbound, then the thing that you're fighting, remember, there's fear across all buckets. For the FUD on the front end, it's what people are trying to drill up is that the fear of what happens if they don't do something about it. But on the back end, the thing that they fear is that they aren't going to be able to solve the problem, that they're going to mess up. So they're afraid that they are not going to choose the right solution. They're afraid there's too much information for them to disseminate down basically into something that they can use. And then they're afraid of outcome uncertainty, that even if they buy this, they're not going to be able to receive their outcome. So the way that you overcome that is diagnosing things that they don't know. So essentially, it doesn't matter which stage they're in. The answer is to diagnose things that they don't know. So if they're in indecision, they're looking to either raise their education level or their confidence level in you, that your education level is higher. One of those two things needs to raise for them to believe that it's a good decision to buy. So you have to keep in mind, this is the instance where the puck is, it's in motion, the object's in motion. And the things that are going to slow it down is they hit procurement, they talk to legal. Oh, 3 more people have to get on this decision. What do they think about it? They don't have buy-in. And so they're like, crap, if I move forward with the decision now, all of a sudden I have 3 people who don't have buy-in that are going to be like, I told you so. their leaders, budgets are slashed. And so these are all things hypothetically that can slow down this puck. So it's not about fighting procurement. It's not about fighting these internal leaders. You don't have control over that. Really. The thing that you need to do is to put more grease underneath the puck so that it continues to slide despite the friction. So the more things that you diagnose that they didn't do, that they didn't know, the more confident they become in your skill level and also in their skill level as a default. Because they either need to believe that your expertise is in a place that you know what you're doing when it comes to their situation, that you can help them on the back end. And they also need to believe that you will help them on the back end. Or they need to believe that their expertise is in a place. So the thing that they're afraid of is they know their expertise isn't high enough. And so they're like, and I don't believe that this seller has any. So the reason I'm going to slap you on the hand, I'm not going to. You've been really nice, really nice, especially on a Sunday. Y'all have all been wonderful. Is how to combat indecision is diagnosing things they don't know. However, how to combat status quo is also diagnosing things that they don't know. So let's go to that case, and we're going to go third question, a closeout. So postbound, meaning they're watching a webinar, or they attended a blog, or they attended an event, or they read through a blog, or they read through your newsletter. That's going to be postbound leads, non-hand raising marketing leads, and then completely cold outbound. Both of those cases, if the problem were big enough, unless when you reach out to this cold outbound, they're already mid-cycle with somebody else, both of these cases, they don't have a problem based on what they know that's big enough to actually do something about. So instead of, spending time trying to get them to see the problem in a bigger way that they already know that they have, I'm going to spend the time diagnosing the problems they didn't know about so that they will actually mobilize to buy. So both cases, you're going after unknowns. That's the solution. Now, where status quo gets tricky is people apply COI and ROI selling in status quo deals to indecision deals, and it makes the situation worse. You have to keep in mind the reason that we know the difference between status quo and indecision is because sellers, I'm just going to be anonymous here, sellers were applying COI and ROI selling to indecision leads, and it was plummeting their close rates. Pretty interesting, right? The point being, in these two buckets, outbound or postbound leads, meaning that's either how you booked the meeting or you're pursuing booking a meeting with them. Both of those cases need to be rich with language and then rich with questions within discovery to find a problem that they don't know about. Because if it was big enough, they would have already solved for it, but they didn't. You came to them. So maybe right time, right place, and pretty cheap, and they'll buy it. If it's convenient, you're counting on that, they have an issue. Like there's some times that I go into like Walgreens, let's say, and I meant to go buy one thing, but I'm like, while I'm here, I guess I could pick up this, that, and the other. So that's how sellers are going about it. So you have to diagnose something they didn't know. I would say primarily you need to find an impact that they didn't know about, right? Or you need to find a tactical problem that they didn't know about, or you need to find a root cause that they didn't know about. So when I go find email deliverability, that is not a new impact. That is a new root cause and tactical problem that they didn't know about. There are 3 meetings at time. 76% of SDRs aren't hitting quota. 85% of AEs aren't hitting 5% of their quota. It's broken. It's bad, right? They know that. What they didn't know is that email deliverability is contributing to it, right? They thought it was all a quality issue. So I rush in here to find tactical problem or root cause so that I can, essentially that they're like, what changed for them? Something has to change in this instance for them to mobilize. Something has to, because based on where they're at, they're not going to start solving for it. Certainly not seriously. So what has to change is either, and the vein that sellers go is they're like, well, I'll just change my price. I'm like, that's not going to work, Brendan. It's just not going to work. They don't even know that they should buy it. They have to buy it, right? That's why discounting hurts, hurts your conversion rates. And it shows that you have no expertise. I'm like, if you're discounting, there's a reason why, right? So I need to either change what's going to happen to them if they don't solve for it by prognosing a future impact they didn't know, find current impact they didn't know, or a persona horizontal or vertical, or I need to find a root cause in a tactical problem that they didn't know. So what I'm changing in that case is basically they already knew the business problem existed. They already know the impact, but they didn't know that there's something else that they could be do to solve for it. So both cases, long and the short of it, is diagnose things they don't know in both cases, and you should be fine. So I wouldn't even necessarily really worry about is it a decision, is it indecision, or is it status quo? Now, specifically speaking, if it's status quo, if it's indecision, so indecision means they started mobilizing to do something about it, right? So they took that first meeting, they were riled up. I want this, I need this, blah, blah, so but then they don't close, or they start to ghost you, or blah, blah, that's indecision for sure. Status quo is you booked them over outbound or postbound, and it's not going anywhere. Bob Harper, it's more like consulting. It's exactly what it's like. Here's the thing I'm going to say, and then I'm going to answer Gianluca's question and close out. I had an easy foray into this because I became a consultant. So it's not that I'm smarter than everyone else, or, I saw light, or blah, blah. It's that my job is to find the problem, specifically unknown problems. So this is kind of like, I think someone was trying to make glue, super glue, and they messed up, and they basically created what puts our Post-it notes together. So it's kind of like a win on mistake. Same thing for me. I went into consulting, and then I noticed how the atmosphere changed. So I'm like, I need to bring that into my first calls because I need to figure out what's going on. And I saw my deals completely turn around. So if you're still watching, I want you to go into the chat. Do you like feeling salesy? Do you like that typically people speaking, well, I don't. And it helps with that too. So my discovery calls are really, that's why I came across it, as I'm like, my job's to find the problem. My job is to solve the problem. My job is to find unknown problems. And they know that there's likely a whole bunch of ones that they didn't know about, right? So that's how I kind of came across this. Yeah. So Bob just said, no, me either. So it will help with that, because they can feel it in the room. I mean it when I say it. The reason I went on this rampage to start doing this is because of how much success it was showing in the room that it was yielding. It's like, hey, my buyers aren't at odds with me anymore. There's this standoffish thing in the beginning, and then at the end, they're opening up because they're like, okay, she's doing something with this information. Here's the thing. I don't think I'm in any way, shape, or form special. It was just the approach. So I haven't gotten an objection in years. And no one has asked me how I compete. And 90% of my deals are competitive. I hate to say that, I haven't lost to a competitor either. And it cannot be because I'm likable. I know that I'm the least likable trainer out there. And I mean that. I'm an introvert. I like to read. C'est moi. Right? I don't go to parties. People don't invite me to them often anymore. Right? So I did go to one last night. But point being, it can't be about it can't be about long standing in the market. I'm one of the newest trainers that exists. It can't be about global entity. I mean, there are people who are out there, thousands of trainers, but I haven't lost a competitive deal. If I had to guess why, it's because I'm airing here every single time. And my competition, even though sales trainers, are not finding those unknowns. One person told you, oh, thank you, Kirsten. Jason's just like, that's really nice. One person told me, we wanted to go with someone else, but you made it so unfair by the way that you sold and how much you, and she was like, it was just, it was ridiculous at one point. So we knew it was fiscally irresponsible to not go with you. Right. And again, I have to stress, I am not special. So when you're going into that demo meeting, if you have a deck, better be a deck 98% about them. The only thing that it has of you is your logo. It should be like, here are the 5 problems. Here are the ways that we're going to solve them. Here are the stats we want to see. Here are them. It doesn't matter about you. Like, so if I have a deck, the only time I've had a deck is it's an in detail deck about them. The process to request a demo, I put screenshots in there. This is how long it took me to get back. I didn't get any calls. Their competitor reached out to me right away 5 times, tried to schedule. When they didn't get one, they requested me on LinkedIn to talk, so that's what the deck is about. So it will just completely change your calls. So I want you to watch something really, really interesting. Then I'm going to answer Gianluca's question and close out. Men, if you wouldn't mind finding this episode, there was basically an episode of the Top to Bottom podcast, a podcast that we used to do. And there was a guest. And the guest, basically, I was tasked with that I have to do discovery with this guest. So it was on the fly. They're like, you're going to do a discovery call live in 20 minutes. But I had 5 minutes to research basically them. And the thing that I was trying to sell them was they were a smoker. And I was trying to sell them to stop smoking, right? So the interesting thing, and you can watch this discovery, Min will put it in the chat. I think it's on YouTube. It's near the back end. The interesting thing is right near the beginning and several times before the call, he was like, I'm going to be really hard on you. I'm going to be a hard prospect on you. I'm not going to give you much leeway, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to be a tough buyer. And by the end of that discovery, or halfway through, he forgot to be a tough buyer on me. Just like your prospects do. So I went and I'm like, hey, the first thing I need to hack is kids, the effect on the kids. I'm like, do you have any kids? Yes, I have 2. How old are they? He was like 3 and 1 years old. I'm like, bingo. I got 1, So I'm like, how did you first smoke? Can you walk me through it? He's like, I was 14, blah, blah. I'm like, your parents smoke? I'm like, yeah. Or he was like, yeah. And I was like, have they quit? And he was like, one of them has quit. And I'm like, so when did they find out? He's like, I was like 21 or something. I'm like, did they try to get you quit? And he said, yeah. And I said, did you? And he was like, no, maybe for like a couple of days. And I went back to it. I'm like, and if you don't mind me asking, why did you return back to it? He was like, because it's my life, blah, blah, blah. So the first angle I went, and at the end of I want you to watch the call, but at the end of the call, I'm like, well, there's good news and bad news. And good news is your kids are only 3 and 1. And kids don't form cognitive memories until they're 5. So if you stop smoking now, they will have no memory of this. The bad news is if they do, if that oldest kid has a memory of you smoking, and that means smell of it, look of it, anything, they see cigarette cartons, it's going to 80% increase, for a 4x the likelihood basically that they'll become a smoker themselves. They will they'll try their first cigarette at 11. They'll get fully addicted by 14. And the biggest predominant factor to smoking is that your parents do it. And even when you remind them, if you quit later and you try to get them to quit, just like you did, they won't quit. And here's the punchline. People who start smoking in high school, 50% of them will die from it. So what do you want to do? And he was like, I'm going to quit smoking. So what I was after is an impact, right? And I'm like, if he had said, no, I don't have kids, or I have kids and they're 11 and 13, I'm like, he's hosed already. Or I went a second angle and I said, how much of your income is disposable? He said 50%. I'm like, move on. I'm not going to go the save time or save money because he has 50% disposable income. It's not a problem. So the point is this, he was really riled up about like, I'm going to take it out hard on her because this is LinkedIn and blah, blah, blah. And he's a wonderfully nice guy. But he was like, I'm going to make it hard on her. But he forgot to, just like your prospects will, because he started opening up with the real information. Because I would guess he could tell I was going somewhere with something that he didn't know. In postbound, how do you anchor during a cold call to their download or have you participate in a webinar? It's a quick question. I'll close out. Min put it in the chat. Yeah, exactly, Gianluca. They don't remember until you're 5, and his kids were 3. So I was like, you've got a year. But if you're still smoking a year from now, your oldest will mimic the behavior onto the youngest. So both the kids will 80% likelihood they're going to become a smoker themselves. So the answer to the question for postbound or bridgebound premise, if you don't mind, go to flipthescript.com, click written, and click the comprehensive encyclopedia of sales plays. And there's a whole list of premises, postbound or bridgebound. Postbound is a non-hand-raising marketing action. Bridgebound is they took an action or an action was taken upon them, but had nothing to do with your marketing team. How I'd couch that on a cold call is this. For cold outbound, I'm like, hey, Gianluca, this is Becc calling from Flip the Script. How have you been? You're like, good. Who is this? I'm like, great question. The reason for my outreach is... And in cold outbound, this is where I hit them with 15 seconds of personalization. I was on your LinkedIn earlier. I hope it doesn't creep you out. And I really like this article that you wrote on blank, blank, and blank. And I really like this line on blank, blank, and blank. So I was curious to know if you come across Flip the Script before. So that's for cold outbound. If there is a postbound or bridgebound premise, like webinar attendant, blah, 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 then the only difference is this. I'm like, hey, this is Becc calling from Flip the Script. How have you been? And you're like, good. Who is this? And I'm like, great question. Reason for my outreach is I saw that you attended our webinar on blank, blank, and blank. But more importantly, I saw your article on LinkedIn where you're talking about blank, blank, and blank. So I was curious to know if you've come across Flip the Script before. So I use it as a couch. I transition with, but more importantly, and then I hit a piece of personalization. That front section, you have got to interrupt the pattern that they think that you don't know them and that they're on a list. If you don't do that, you're dead. So I would say something to the degree of you need to personalize and use some personalization data, to show them that you respect them, that you've actually done your homework. So they think that, based on that interaction, based on the fact you've done that, people tell me all the time, I'm confident that you could be a good user of blank. I'm like, Brendan, chill. Why? I'm like, you don't know a thing, which I'm not mad. Not a child. I'm not mad you don't know anything about my roller company or blah, blah, blah. Will hurt. But I'm like, you don't know anything about me or my company or anything. You haven't even asked a question. Why on earth are you confident? You don't even know if I have the problem, right? It is bizarre to me. I'll hear these cold calls, especially the ones on LinkedIn. The influencer asks them, so we work with people with bad open rates or, pipeline issues. And they're like, yeah, I have a kind of a pipeline issue, pretty bad open rate. I'll hear them skate straight through it. They're like, yeah, so we help with that. I'm like, you have to ask a question. What's the open rate? For example, what do you mean by we have pipeline issues? Whatever they say, you've got to drill in there because generally speaking, you might know a problem. You don't know theirs and they just lobbied it up. You got to double down there. So that's how I would couch it for postbound or webinar. Okay. This has been for sure the longest episode. Taylor, she inspired me. Thank you for all the wonderful questions. Happy dimanche, everyone. À tous. We tomorrow. So this episode, hypothetically, was on why you shouldn't get multiple buyers to agree on the problem that they solve. It's completely different problems. That's a punchline. Could have summed it up in one line. Tomorrow, we're going to go into, it's a very technical session, pain versus problem versus master problem versus outcome driving impact, root cause, horizontal impact, blah, blah, and how to easily find one in Disco. And the next day, we're going into how to create new urgency and new buyer intent with the buyer out of thin air. keep in mind, I saw that there was a couple of questions on questions you should ask. The 13th day, we're going into all the questions you should never ask. And the 14th day, we're going into all the questions that you should ask. Awesome, Justin. Attachment theory is amazing. Attachment theory, interdependence theory, Benjamin Franklin effect is another one that I would look up. Zeigarnik effect, Todd Grande, The Evolving Self by Robert Keegan. That is my second most important book. Games people play, but then the Evolving Self by Robert Keegan is a great book if you like psychology. So anyhow, that's everything for today. I'm going to, I've got to go get some bread, and then I'm going to natation. I'm going to the final day of swimming tonight. So the stadium's like 7 miles away, but for some reason in my head, I'm like, the traffic's so bad. I've just been running there. So I show up and people are like, she looks disgusting. Why is she sitting next to me? Anyhow, final day of swimming is tonight. So I'm going to go see Marchand, hopefully Léon Marchand, close it out tonight in a couple of hours. But thank you for all of the wonderful comments, questions, time today. So I will see you tomorrow. We are going to pick up with pain versus problem, business problem, tactical problem, outcome, driving impact, 12 different types of problems, etc. For a very nerdy session tomorrow on Monday. But as always, I'm going to be French wannabe and say merci pour tout. À demain, à bientôt. Gianluca, I noticed that you always say à demain. À demain. See you tomorrow. And merci pour tout. Et au revoir pour maintenant. Bye bye, y'all.